My name is Tim Albright. I am from AVNation. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're doing a live stream on our website, AVNation.tv. We also have a great audience here at Leyard Planar's offices in New York City for New York Digital Signage Week. We're going to go down the line here, have everybody introduce themselves, but thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about the digital canvas and some interesting things that creatives and designers and actually end users can use the new technology for. So first and foremost, David, your name and where you're from.
Hey there, David Bianchardi with AVNC. We're a creative design and technology studio here in New York. We call ourselves an experience design studio. We design and build software-driven physical environments with digital layers in architectural spaces, museums, things like that.
Okay, Michael.
Hey, I'm Michael Luck-Schneider. I am the Creative Technology Director for the Digital Experience Design Group that's sitting within Gensler. Gensler being the world's largest architectural design firm. Within it, we have a team that really focuses on how we bring digital activations into the built environment, and I oversee how we implement and leverage technology to do that.
Yeah. Hey.
My name is Abe Pierre. I'm the American team leader for Bloomberg LP. We touch more the training, flex, multi-purpose conference rooms, but we also have a big piece in the digital signage environment for our spaces when it comes to public area displays and what we're bringing to their end users on their mobile phones, desktops, etc.
Yeah, Aaron.
All right, James Fife. I'm with RP Visual Solutions. I'm their consultant extension. And RP Visuals is, for lack of a better term, the glue that holds the displays into the building and lets the building breathe and not affect any of the displays and make sure it's going to last for a long time and look good.
So, very good. Sam?
Hi, I'm Sam Phoenix. I'm the Vice President of Research and Development for Planar Leyard, which hopefully you guys all know who we are since you're here at our showroom.
You're
Welcome.
in this space.
Hi, I'm Eran Sharon. I lead this digital experience design practice at TAD. TAD is a technology consulting firm here in New York City. We focus on enterprise workplace and try to look at a more experiential environment in terms of how we see people living, working, engaging with the workplace.
All right, David, we'll start with you on this. We talk about content today, and you can walk through Times Square and you can see something that, again, this is a little subjective, but really great content and really content that wasn't necessarily made for the display. So when you think about content today, what is it that you're talking about?
So we've been talking about something in terms of sort of deep media.
Okay.
If we think of all the typical displays that we see in the world that are 99% historically have been fed with linear media play out, right? So produced videos that have been put in a can, made into a playlist, and sequenced into some curated playlist for the audience in the place that we are and with the stories that we're trying to tell. When we try to scale that, or we try to do something interesting that's a non-typical canvas or that has insane pixel resolutions, et cetera, you start to run out of steam on that strategy of filling them with pre-produced linear media. Either it's going to go stale too fast, or it's going to cost too much to produce, or it's not going to be relevant when you want audiences to pay attention. So we start to think about data as material that can be used for storytelling that's really content. All the ways in which libraries of images and other things that the brand already has in place, how do they get recomposited and leveraged into dynamic media? So it's about media that can be essentially generated in real time, algorithmically, and combine that with some moments of pre-produced media so that you actually have something that's living and breathing, responding to the environment, responding to the curator, and doesn't mean you have to call the agency every 5 minutes and spin up another 10 minutes of 80 megapixel video in some cases.
Abe, is that something that you look at, and is that a concern of yours?
Absolutely. For Bloomberg, what we've done is we've been able to take exactly what we're speaking about now when it comes to that deep media, that deep content, and give it to the end users where they are. So we have a lot of different screen sizes all over our environment, right? So we have a traditional LCD panel that's 55 inches in a conference room. Then we have our lobby area that has, you know, a 32.9 side-by-side LG 88 stretch inch that also has its own particular media. But then we go over to our EMEA offices and APAC offices, we have different digital signage pieces there too, but we need to deliver the same type of content to all those pieces because Bloomberg likes to be Bloomberg wherever they are. And to that point is what we've decided via our creative team, the marketing team, is to create content or create the story and let the display kind of evolve into itself. So our creative team has decided to push content or push the content that's most important to Bloomberg, which is its philanthropy work. So in all of our conference rooms, in training room spaces, once those machines go to sleep for 10 minutes, a screensaver comes on. Instead of having something traditional, it's all of the philanthropy work that Bloomberg's been working on for that quarter, for that month. And it's frequently updated per whatever's happening in the philanthropy space. Another cool part that we've decided to incorporate within the internal office communications is what we call Bloomberg Arcade, where it's local content to that specific office. So if you're in New York, you have New York content. If you're in Princeton, you have Princeton content. If you're in London, you have London specific content. And that content is, again, derived around what's happening in that office. So whether you're at your desktop and it's a smaller size screen, a smaller window on your desktop, you're ingesting that content for your site. Or if you're in the pantry area, it's on a massive LED planar Leyard wall there that also is giving you that same content. So whichever Bloomberg space you're in, you're gonna get a similar feel of content, but it's gonna be content specific to who you are and what you're ingesting.
Mm-hmm. The same way I want to bring you in, something that David said about the deep media and the data-driven stories. When you're looking and you're talking with folks like David and like Eran and even the end users, where are you guys when it comes to making sure that what these guys are coming up with is able to be displayed, I guess properly is the best way, but with their original vision in mind.
Thanks. So I think one of the interesting things that we've been talking about is this digital canvas, and traditionally, it was 16:9. It was rectangular. With LED, because people tend to fill a space, and it also has options where you can have like curved screens, flexible screens, all kinds of shapes and sizes, and very large as well. It allows you to really think about the experience and think about how you can make it more of an immersive thing. Like people can almost like lose themselves in the content in a way that you can't really do when you just have this little rectangle. So the important things for us as we're thinking about developing products is trying to make them as flexible as possible. And I don't mean just literally flexible, but also like making sure that we stay up on all the standards so that whatever type of source content that you have, we have a way to get it on the wall. But also experimenting with different display technologies like the transparent OLED. I mean, it just opens up a huge amount of possibilities for what you can do with that. I've seen some really interesting concepts where people have layered it and put LCD or LED behind it, so it creates almost like a 3D effect. So one of the fun things about my job, like we design products and we're engineers, we're geeks, and we're not nearly as creative as the people who come up with these experiences, and it's really fun for my team when we get to see the case studies and we get to see the images of what people have done with these building blocks that we've provided.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quickly, can you define for me then what you mean by flexible when it comes to the standards that all these folks are starting to work with?
Yeah, so there's different types of sources, whether it's media players, content servers, high-end graphics workstations, video processor. Like there's a ton of different types of sources, and there's quite a few different display standards for how you get that content to a wall or to a display. So we're always making sure we're always compliant with those standards, and we stay up to date on what the latest ones are.
All right, very good. Around, same kind of question here, the first one here, talking about deep media and making sure that the content is dynamic, right? Talk for a second about making sure that the content is dynamic and making sure that the client's needs are being met, even though it may be being created by AI or by a machine.
So the way we do is we start with like learning what the client's stories are, what they want to do. It's like a part of an immersion process or a discovery process. Once we know that, depending on how abstract or literal the story needs to be told, we then take stock of what David was mentioning, inventory what they have. So far we've been very much in tune with the design intent or the storytelling design intent throughout. We take that, we take stock of that, and then the main difference between this and classic way of compositing a movie that tells a story is that we create building blocks and coding and algorithms that help assemble the story together in real life. And we also we think about it more than like a 10-second duration. We think about it over a longer period of time. So again, the story is being told with variations, with permutations. You can, if the story is very literal, we can go and start crafting mini stories, like campaigns, so to speak, right? Yeah. So the design intent on the client's intent is retained throughout the process. It's just almost the way the tools we use to tell the story are a little bit different, and they lend themselves to a more timeline-based story approach, or a longer view, if you might call it, for content to be assembled and reassembled and represented.
Right. Michael, when you guys go into the same kind of content, whether that is a dynamic storyline or you're looking at one-offs or you're going down the road of machine learning and machine creation, what's your strategy when you're talking with the clients?
See, I think our perspective when we approach these type of experiences actually to start it not with the story of the content, but with thinking about the medium and defining and understanding that this is that we're inventing the medium, right? Like this is not an existing medium that there's $1 trillion of content for, and understanding the medium and the story together, like the medium and the experiential goals together, then ends up being the content that we have to deliver. And so, I think when Sam was talking about like flexibility, for us, it's how can we have products that can be part of the architectural or the built space that don't play the role of a traditional display. Because really, when you have a traditional display on the wall in a built environment, I think you have two choices. You either ignore it or you leave the built environment and go into that window. And so if we're going to create dynamic spaces that support the activities that are happening in that space, we have to think about how that medium is a building block that is like brick or any other architectural material, but has a dynamism to it. And so, starting there, then we start to define, whether this is a generative piece. And we tend to go generative because the speeds of change with architectural materials are slow, and they're based on change in the environment. Like the passing car creates a change in a shadow on a wall or where the sun is in the sky. And so using some of those same inspirations as our data for how our dynamic spaces are changing algorithmically, I think matches a lot of the tempo or the cadence of a built environment much better than a traditional like linear cut media piece.
Yeah. Real quickly before we move on, and David's over here shaking his head at all of you, so I want to get your thoughts on this. You mentioned the fact of the consideration between completely removing and starting afresh with a building block or going into that window, I think is the phrase you used. What's the consideration between the two? I mean, is it simply cost, or is it, that existing window, that existing installation really does fit that space, so why are we reinventing it? Let's utilize the window that's there.
I mean, I think it's more about a decision of what the goal of that space is for. Like if you're in a presentation space and you want everybody in the audience to go into this window and no longer be aware of the other people, it's great for that. Yeah. But if you're creating a space where there's other activity that's supposed to be happening there, then you don't want people to leave that physical space and go into there. So it's more of a behavioral or experiential goal-driven decision than a technology-driven decision.
Or even cost.
Yeah.
Or cost. David, like I said, you were agreeing with a lot of folks here. So
I was just taking it back to your question about content, right? Because obviously, how do we deliver value? Well, first of all, this thing has to do a job, probably, and some of that is some kind of content, let's call it loosely, but when Michael correctly expands that, what we're really doing is, in some cases, we're creating behavior. We're giving a space of behavior.
Okay.
And sometimes that's really expressive, sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's video, but it doesn't have to be considered a performant space. And so I think that's first a broadening of the definition of content is helpful.
Very good. Yeah, go ahead.
And I just wanted to echo exactly what both David and Michael said is we do a hybrid of both because in AV and in life, right, it depends, right? It depends on where what your situation is. For example, in our London office, we proactively decided not to put any public area displays on the floor where our team was working, which is the complete opposite of our New York office here in Midtown, right? There's 6 displays over everyone's desk all of the time, right? And those displays are showing either Bloomberg TV, right, self-plug, or arcade, or some type of metrics that the Bloomberg terminals feed in them. So it's not that those pieces weren't important in London, but they didn't want it to be a distraction. And to Michael's point is they wanted to create a space for that, a water cooler of sorts. So in each one of our Bloomberg spaces, we have pantries as well, where you get a snack and you sit and you talk and you eat and you collaborate and network. And so that's where we wanted to focus our largest digital signage piece, which tells a story, right? Because it's more than just advertising, it's telling a story, it's engaging, and it's creating conversations that are then gonna lead back to that workspace where everyone's collaborating. But at the same time, what we've decided is we still need that content. We still need the other pieces, like I said, what we call arcade, where it's the internal, hey, we have Met Opera tickets, or there's a picnic happening, first come, first serve. So we still want those folks to have that opportunity to engage in that local community of Bloomberg, but you do it at your desktop level. So instead of having it splattered around the office floor, you log in and you engage now into that piece of content that you're looking for. So it's a channel on an IPTV lineup versus a public area display just flashing you at the time. And what's beautiful is the pantry area does allow you to have that, dual purpose where not only are you, refreshing yourself, but you're also engaging in a piece of content that Bloomberg is telling you.
Well, also you're creating an active act, right, of engaging if you're having to log in, as opposed to a passive act sometimes of a display like that. James, I want to bring you in on this and go back a little bit on what Sam said about being flexible, right? When you go into a design and you get brought into a job, what are some of the considerations of going beyond even like Sam said, the 16:9 space, right, and creating something that's let's say out of the ordinary, right? I mean, all of us up here and all of us in the audience here, we've lived with that 16:9 rectangle for 20 some odd years now, as we moved from S standard definition to 1080 or to 720 even. How do you, as somebody who's kind of the glue in the backing of these systems, look at that and go, okay, here's how we can do this, both creatively but also safely?
Okay. As soon as you go outside the regular 16:9, when you're going to put something into a building, especially if you're going to go into into the window or into the walls, that kind of stuff, you're not just going to stick something on the building. Major concerns are basically isolating that display from the building's breadth. Like a building is going to move and shift, change size, that kind of stuff, in excess of the tolerance of most of modern display technologies. Getting that into a building safely and so that it doesn't actually get affected by those changes in temperature, humidity, seasonal changes, that kind of stuff. That structure and that build and that design and getting it in safely is something that has to start very early on in the process. It needs to include the structural teams and architectural teams. Obviously, any of the creative people have to have their insight on what the aspect ratio would end up being and that kind of stuff. And it's something that needs to be taken into account. I mean, a lot of times in a lot of buildings now, especially in lobbies, the displays are the single largest element within the building in terms of weight. So there's a lot of concerns that way as well in terms of getting it structural, getting it sound, but make sure it's safe. So. Yeah, you definitely would want a 60,000-pound sign falling over on someone.
That would be bad.
It would be very bad.
I wanted to add from the visual or content perspective that when you talk about the 16 by 9, I think also referring to the traditional rectangle we've all been used to seeing on the wall. First of all, that rectangle can be very big and very immersive.
Yeah.
And 16 by 9 can also be 16 by 8.5 or 16 by 7 or whatever it is.
Or 16 by 10. Just
Well,
for-
technically
Yes, exactly.
speaking,
Yeah.
once we start looking at architecture, at media as being part of the architecture and following shapes and sizes that are not necessarily rigid rectangles, then we start creating more intrigue, and we're creating different emotions in somebody's, the immediate recognition of like, that's a display, it's gonna give me information. It breaks up a little bit, and you're able to now get, connect or engage on a more emotional level. And from there, you have more leverage, I'm gonna say, to tell a story or stories in that environment. Size is not always the most important thing, although we like shiny things and they're big. But sometimes I've seen beautiful installations from team members on this panel that were very restrained and refined and deliver an emotional moment. But they were typically not the 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and they did not look like a display.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the concept of resolution has definitely gone away, and then resolution really, speaking as a past consultant, resolution is now more than one component. It's the carrier that gets it there. It's the density of the screen that actually creates the image itself, and it's the content player that either through ad channel or multiple channels puts that on the screen. And that can create an almost, for lack of a better term, think of like a carpet or a wallpaper. And then that technology becomes just what you see, but the pattern that gets put on it is the content itself. So you can pretty much put it anywhere, put like pixels anywhere on the building, and then you can map that, and you can mix technologies as well. So you can put OLEDs with LEDs with LCDs and create things that are completely unique because of the way that they're actually mixed media in terms of physical space as well.
Sam, what's some of the things that we can do now from a technology standpoint that we couldn't do both from a consultant standpoint but also from a creative standpoint that we couldn't do maybe 5 or 7 years ago?
I think direct view LED, like this display behind me, has really changed the game. It's seamless, so you don't have to forget the bezels, which were, for some situations, the bezels are good because they help segment the content in a way that makes it easier to consume. But if you're trying to create an experience or an emotional connection with your customer, you have to make it. You're trying to fool the brain, right? You're trying to make it feel like it's real, and so having no bezels helps with that. They're also very bright, so. You used to have to spend, and I know James knows a lot about this, about planning for lighting in a space. Like if you're using a projector, like you're lighting that space differently. And unfortunately, even if you've got a really bright projector, like it's a darker space, so your ability to like see each other's faces and have a shared experience is different. But with LED, it's super bright. It's got a very wide color gamut. It just is able to mimic what you see in life just so much easier. So, and then I don't know. I love the transparent OLED. It just, for years we had, transparent LCDs, which just looked like a big microwave box. And really what people wanted was a window that they could, put content on. And they didn't want to have a big box, and they didn't want to have to stick their precious dinosaur bones in something that was going to potentially degrade them. So when we first saw the first version of the transparent OLED, it was about 5 years ago. I saw it in a lab. As a concept, and I was super excited about it because it's what we wanted, right? We wanted a window which you can put content on. So
Yeah, content on, and the one here in the office here is it's a Rolex display. So there are 3 physical Rolexes behind it with the content for Rolex playing in front of it. So
yeah, and I'm excited to see what's coming too. I mean, there's been a lot of advances in the last few years. Like I said, fine pitch LED, now we're down to like 0.7, 0.6, which is incredibly pixel dense and expensive. But that wasn't possible 5 years ago. Fine pitch was like, 3 millimeter or something.
Yeah.
But things are continuing to advance, and there's been a lot of work. Some of you maybe follow the tech news. You'll see like how many patents have been filed on like micro LED. Like Apple just filed 135 or something yesterday. It's crazy, and those are tiny, tiny dense pixels that are going to allow heads-up displays. We're going to see a resurgence of like the Google Glass, I think, where they actually just look like glasses, but there are displays as well, and all that investment for these super bright, tiny, tiny pixels is going to enable finally the Star Trek or the Star Wars, the holographic display it's coming. I've seen some very compelling prototypes. It's a few years out yet, but you guys as creators are going to get so excited to be able to have a true holographic display, because that's really going to get into that immersive, connected experience with the content.
All right. David, some of the question is from a laying it out and kind of casting a vision. What have you guys seen from your end that you can do today that you wish you could have done 5 years ago, but today it's like finally you're like, yeah, we can make this happen?
I feel like the forces are kind of gathering to enable this kind of work, and I've collaborated with so many folks on this panel for over a decade, right? And we've been doing this kind of work. It's just the barrier to entry was always harder. We could always find some enterprising client who would allow us to innovate on their behalf. But it really now feels like everybody wants this work. They see how physical spaces can be expressive. They can talk to market-facing elements. They can talk to the community of a connected workplace. And so it stands to reason that whether it's marketing or brand or communications teams, they want their building spaces, their public, their public spaces to communicate, temporary as well as permanent. We mostly work in the permanent side. So I think the reason this panel is so aptly titled is because I think we're all seeing this appetite, and I think a lot of people are finding that they go into these conversations with clients, and even with all that appetite, the project doesn't survive and make it through design and into implementation. And so I think we all have an interest in saying, okay, well, if our clients are asking for this work and we have all the materials in hand to do this kind of work, how do we bridge the gap between it came out, it was awesome, or it didn't happen? And I think that's a question is when we work with Sam's folks on, hey, we want this thing that does this but not this, can you? And we have that kind of collaborative engineering relationship. They're being creative as well. They're also helping us with guardrails. But on the user side, I think someone like Abe needs to say, yes, we can't just fill these things with stuff we've made ourselves. We need to tell stories with data. How do we go about doing that? It's all these parts coming together. And I think from our part, what we've seen is today, I think with price points being what they are, with the appetite being what it is, with everybody essentially claiming this capability, what's the differentiator? What's the differentiator in outcomes? And we're saying a lot of the time, somebody looks at this amazing display, this amazing canvas, this incredible installation that's been planned, and says, wait a second, how are we going to feed the beast? And when they start to come to terms with what it would take to feed the beast in the way they know how, they can the project. And it's actually the best thing they could probably do, right? And so if we can instead go and say, hey, the way you get ROI is by spending a little bit more up front when you have money to capitalize this thing, create a platform that's going to make evergreen, deep media behavior over time. And then you don't have to, get memos every quarter about all the OpEx that's going into creating media for something. So it's, I think it's the forces are gathering. The difference is I think we've all been doing this work. It's just becoming, there's a process. We've got ways of doing this work. We can educate clients. We can bring them along. But the crux is still, why would I make this 7, 8, 9-figure investment?
Real quickly, you said that you get to a certain point and then the projects don't happen. What's been the primary cause or the reasoning for that? Is it the fact that they suddenly realize they have to keep continuing to, as you say, feed the beast, or is it other factors?
It could be so many things. I mean, ultimately, when we get involved, as early as possible with clients, they're almost at a strategy level. They're saying, hey, we feel like we need to, employ this way of engaging with this audience or this audience or this community. We want to do it in these places or with these touch points. So really, we're coming up with a bunch of different approaches, some of which may be very tech forward, and some where you're actually sort of sublimating the technology and using that to support a service element. So a lot of the times, these ideas don't make it out of the ideation stage because consultants are being responsible and saying, well, on balance, I think we should take those pixels out of the lobby and you should buy that piece of art, or whatever it is. So I think there's good reasons for these things not to go through, but when they feel like the right answer to the KPIs, to the stakeholders' priorities, oftentimes the thing that I think, if we look at it responsibly and we say, hey, we need a content strategy here, this thing's on 24/7, that's 9,000 hours of content a year, have you thought that through? You should also have an answer. If you're going to, you're responsible if you provoke the question, and you're successful if you have an answer.
Abe?
Yeah, some of the factors that kill projects is some of the folks on the team, be it in leadership or other levels, have ideas and they want their ideas to be, come to fruition. But unfortunately, sometimes they haven't done the homework in order to really prepare for what that content is going to be and what that canvas is going to look like. So they'll have I want, a mosaic of, different LED panels scrolling through our lobby and, it needs to be this color at this time and that color at this time. But unfortunately, they don't really know what it takes to make that vision happen, and that vision isn't really, like I said, developed. And so it's like they present this Ferrari that will only, drive 55 miles an hour at the end of the day. And when they understand, wow, why am I paying Ferrari if we're only going to do this with it? It becomes a cost exercise and it gets scrapped. And that's unfortunate because at the time that my team, unfortunately, is brought in, the AV team or the creative team is brought in, is they've already kind of had their idea of what they want it to look like, and they just want us to mold their vision. And unfortunately, if we were brought in the beginning, we could absolutely obtain what they want and give them realistic numbers and really showcase the power of content and technology in their spaces. So that, unfortunately, does happen at times, not all the time. We are successful a lot in what we do, but when it does get killed or just dragged out, a lot of times because of those factors.
One interesting aspect or experience that I'd like to share is that sometimes you build this jewel box or this interior that's engaging and immersive, and then the clients either have an appetite, but they just can't pass the budget to make more of them if they have multiple locations, or they want to be able to scale something into a more modest representation but still carry the same spirit. And that's something that's getting more and more interesting because, as David was mentioning, the appetite and the market, there seems to be more readiness to accept this as the valuable proposition for any kind of storytelling in interiors. And sometimes people say, yes, but we can make only one of those. How can we make it in the other 3 smaller locations that we have around the world? And then one of the things is that, do you start with the design of the story that can hold a more modest visualization? Or do you try to replicate and save on the fact that you've done one and you can build the other ones cheaper? Or is it altogether a different approach? So it's a nice, interesting condition to be in where somebody says, we love this one, we need to make more of them. How can we make that a cost-effective scaling plan? It's the next phase of after you've built the first one
It's the next phase.
for the client.
Yeah, Michael, I want to bring you in on this, and the same kind of question is walk me through getting, from original ideation from the very beginning, and then, to Abe's point, where you've got several cooks, as it were, and they each have their own ideas, but then, Ron made a really good point, you can have one, let's say, marquee, but then around the world, you can have various different flavors of that or sizes of it, I guess.
I guess first to the cook's question, I'd say I think we all have to be honest that it is still Wild West to some extent, and I say that from not the technology side, but as much in the both design and client side, right? Like our designers are just figuring out what LED is and how it works in this space. Like our architects and our interior designers, and even our content designers. We've got some genius content designers, but their actual experience of working on large displays is still young. right? They haven't had 20 years of knowing how to create content for non-traditional displays. And then from the client side, they're not used to thinking about space as content, right? The people that traditionally think about space are the facilities or the operations people, like how many butts can we get in the seats, not how are we telling our story in space. So I think that one of the reasons that a lot of projects get killed is because everybody's still new at this, right? Both on their side and our side, and there are unrealistic expectations, or just there's a lot of novices in it because nobody's really done this. It's starting to be done, but we're just on that cusp of really activating the built environment.
So you're saying we're all novices then?
I'd say we are all not. I mean,
Well,
realistically,
that's a fine
no.
answer.
But I really do think we are all novices at activating the built environment with non-traditional displays. It just, the technology hasn't been around enough for us to have done, 20 years of these types of sophisticated projects. We're doing great work. I think there's fantastic examples out there. But I spent a lot of my time figuring out how I can grow my team's expertise in how to work with this, because it's new to them. Even if they're amazing designers that have been around for many decades, this is a new world. So that's like the cooks in the kitchen. It's how do you manage a bunch of novice cooks in the kitchen? And then as far as leveraging network or multiple locations. I mean, one thing that I've found is really interesting and I think helps save projects is if you think about them as an ecosystem, not as a one-off or a marquee moment or this iconic moment. Because yes, the iconic moment is important, and a lot of what we do are these big, cool marquee moments, and you put a lot of money into that, but I think you really leverage that value when it's part of a larger ecosystem. So, similar, I think, at Bloomberg, where you use that center space to give that message or give a sense of identity, but then that repeats itself through multiple channels throughout the whole campus. That's where the value really comes in. Everybody knows that they are in this space. The marquee moment announced it, and now it's continued that story on all of your different touch points throughout the space.
I just want to comment on your about the novices. I work with all the consultants and creators across North America, and it is fascinating to see how each one of the teams is actually leveraging the technology. It's really neat for me because I get to see how everyone approaches it differently, and there is no right way. There's a couple not so good ways, but the technology itself is actually, in terms of flexibility, it can really be painted and put almost anywhere into a building. It can be made different shapes. It can be curved. You can do all kinds of different things with it. You can move it. And like there's different things you can do. And it's just really, I do agree that there are a lot of people who are novices at it, and it's unique for me because I get exposed to it on like a 100-fold level because everyone's like, well, how about this and about that, about this and about that, because my role is to help with the consultants in terms of actually figuring out, okay, what pixel pitch they need and that kind of stuff, and give them the distances and the brightness and that kind of stuff within the environment, and I'll run that initial math for them and just basically be like an assist. And I agree, it's a novice enterprise, but I think it's exciting at the same time because it is a novice exercise and there's no guaranteed way to have to use it. So you can really, it's kind of neat because it is the Wild West. That's a great comment and way to put it. Yes.
And that's where innovation comes from, right? Innovation comes from us all trying to figure it out, and that's why it is so exciting and why there's great stuff coming from it. But it's also why it's a challenge.
It is a very big challenge for sure.
I'll ground us in the term pioneering. Pioneer. Novices becomes pioneers.
There you go.
Sam, let's kind of wrap this around and what we started talking about in the beginning here, and that's the digital canvas, right? We talked about getting beyond the rectangle. What was it, 16:9, 16:8, 16:10, I don't care, right? Or 2.44 if you want to get into cinema, right? from the manufacturer's standpoint and creative, you are on the cutting edge here. When you talk about the digital canvas, are you talking about that shape there, or is it more ethereal? Is it more of an idea rather than there's a solid piece of shape there?
I think for me personally, it is more ethereal. It's kind of like James was saying. It's like carpet or wallpaper almost. But I have to ground myself and remember that some people are not as pioneering as others, and it's very confusing. And so, and now I'll do a little product plug, which I don't normally do. I'm not a salesperson, but one thing we found with LED, because it can be any resolution and any size, people get a little overwhelmed by the idea of it, and then they buy a wall that fits a physical space, and they don't have content that can fit, and it can be challenging. So we made these like pre-made configurations of like, it's basically like an LED wall in a box. This is HD and this pitch. It's 4K and this pitch, and it's one part number, one price. You buy it, you get everything you need, and you're done. And I think there's a place for that. I do, because like we've all been exploring. Like Michael was saying, that some of these content creators just aren't ready to be in that headspace of digital wallpaper. And sometimes you just want a presentation wall, So I think that's fine. So we try to enable like sort of both levels of like wild, out there, whatever, and then like just make it easy if you just want a box, a screen.
And the fact that in LED, direct to LED, the building blocks have gotten smaller, right? They're a lot smaller, gives us more flexibility.
Yeah.
So you're using a productized version, but you're creating something that's a lot more bespoke, or at least bespoke looking.
Right. James, when you start talking with folks about digital canvases and what sort of things do you start walking down with them, regardless of whether it's the actual physical mount? Obviously, for you guys, it's also the building structure and the substructure, the spaces behind it, the things you're actually anchoring to. But also some of it has to be, how they're using it and exactly what the experience of the person consuming that has to be.
Yeah, there's two different aspects to putting a building into the wall from a person aspect. One is the viewer side of it. The other one is actually the service side of it.
Okay.
I would say that we actually spend a fair amount of our time actually figuring out how to actually service different aspects of it, whether it's getting at cabling in behind, moving stuff out of the way. There is no standard in the industry in terms of it has to be done a certain way, which is great because there's always something flexible and you can use even within Planar's line. You have you have TVF, you have DLX, you have TWA, and there's all kinds of different products that you can use. Each one has its own aspects of how you manage that and what the image it creates with. So what they're trying to do in terms of the use case and what the architecture has within it really has to marriage together. And it's being able to take a look at both parts of that and basically going, okay, well, I know here's something you could do and here's something you could do, and just kind of giving almost like a heads up to the design team. It's like, well, on what would be possible and what's not possible, and it's a very malleable environment in terms of that. It's recognizing the gotchas that are really the key things. I think nowadays you can get 99% of it, and that 1%, well, it could end up being the 99% in the end on how to get it into a building. So,
David, same kind of question when you're designing and you're talking to clients, and they're going down this path. Either it's because of something you suggested, or they're bringing it to you because they've read something, seen something, gone to a friend's office, and what have you. What are some of those gotchas? What are some of those hurdles you're making sure to navigate them around to make sure that, this is going to be a great experience for everybody going from end to end?
And this really piggybacks on to what Michael was saying about how innovation comes from a curiosity or a novice state of mind, as well as we're putting technology for a 3, 5, in some cases 7-year life cycle into a built environment, and we're trying to give it this software-defined behavior, right? So that's a complicated series of questions. So I think the first thing is the cooks in the kitchen. It's actually a team sport. This is not a traditional process. You don't call your architect and ask them to build a storytelling environment unless you call, certain architects, and you don't call your agency and ask them to design a building. So there's this function that needs to stitch together oftentimes when you walk into a C-suite, the CMO and the chief of operations are actually at loggerheads. They want this thing. CMO's got some OpEx to buy commercials with. COO's been told that we're going to make this thing in the lobby, and you've got to budget it out. And so I think just getting alignment from stakeholders who have been effectively led to believe that their interests are in opposition with each other. And so you stitch them together, and then you bring in a bunch of people, and that includes technical resources who are going to do pre-engineering, even manufacturers. I mean, the number of times that we go and reach out to Randy and say, hey, RPV, we think that this is going to be something where we're going to need your level of attention to detail and fabrication know-how. So let's just start having this conversation now. What would be the gotchas? What are the things that we need to consider? So I think it's the way to guard against the pitfalls is by recognizing that this is a team sport, and that's true on the client side and on the design and implementation side, and showing the client that this ecosystem, the way you get this work done is with a different set of resources that they're typically used to having to pull together, and that while we're novices and curious, and we're being asked to be novices because they say, hey, come do something new. So it's like, okay, what? And then they say, what should we do? And I said, I have no idea. You just said, let's do something new. So I'm going to listen to you.
Let's find out together.
Right? Let's find out together. So, but that can scare them. And so you have to be able to say, look, it's not just a free-for-all. We're not having everybody jump in the pool at the beginning of the party, but we have to have a way to say, here, look, there's a process. We've done this before. We start by looking at your spaces and being curious about what they're there for and how they feel. We start to look at your audiences and who's in the space and how might we connect with them. We start to hear from the storytellers in your organization and what is it that they're desperate to convey. Is it an emotion? Is it a piece of information? Is it a we're winning in the market today? We don't know, right? And those three things then have process. So you can sort of say, listen, you're trying to have us do something new, but we have an innovation process. There's a different kind of risk that you're getting into here, so you need a different kind of risk management of that innovation, and it's by having a team that stitches together architecture, construction, storytelling, digital strategy, software, display technology. I mean, it's really is a team sport, and it's not led through the typical process.
Mm-hmm. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. One of the things that I found really really encouraging lately is the amount of focus I've seen in the AV community in a concept called design thinking, which if you're a creative, like you learn it in school, and it's a thing. But it's not something that you traditionally would learn if you go to, like, if you have an engineering degree or a mechanical engineering degree or electrical engineering degree. But it's becoming more and more like, even just like for regular business people, like this is a way to solve business problems, is to use this design thinking approach. And it just makes that getting everybody together and going through these ideation scenarios, it works in a way that it didn't before. So I'm really encouraged to see the amount of investment there's been, and I see some people nodding. Like it was surprised me at the beginning because I was like, design thinking? I don't really think about that for AV, but it really fits. So.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep, Michael, David was talking about the team sport. How do you get your teams, whether it's your teams or Abe's teams, together on the same page in this new environment? Because yes, we said this several times, we're pioneers, we're novices, however you want to say it. It's a new environment, it's a new creative process, and creating content for it, whether it's 24/7, so 9,000 some odd hours, or it's 8 hours a day. This is a new way to think when it comes to the content. How do you get everybody on board and their head wrapped around it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I would build on both what Sam was saying with design thinking and David's risk and process. And it is really about how do you not see it for the first time when you get on site, right? Like you can't innovate anything effectively if the first time you've seen it is when it's done. Yeah. And so, we've actually, Gensler's invested significantly in creating a space that we can iteratively design and bring real technologies into our space. And I'd say that for team sport, we become a team both in thinking about risk. So we have like moments of risk assessment where we each come with our expertise and say, you know what, I don't think that story is going to work, or I think that's going to get too hot. How are we going to ventilate it? Or, you know, I don't think anybody's going to jump up and down as their interaction with it. And so everybody throws their risks on the table, and then we make plans to figure out, you know, which of these risks are going to kill the project, so we have to prove that they're going to work. Which of them can we move to the next phase of design to prove out then? But it's a very iterative, where are we now? What are the risks? How do we do a mock-up to prove out those risks so we can move to the next, through that gate into the next phase of design?
And
Hey, go ahead, Ron.
And I think I wanted to maybe even abstract it a little bit, because I think David and Michael both said very strong positions about the team sport. The rapid iteration means that multiple entities, like the physical designers or interior designers, the technology people, the storytelling people, experience design people, software environment people, all these people are actually working almost in lockstep throughout all the phases of the project. There's no real big handoff where, like in a traditional design effort, somebody's programming and then somebody's executing, or some programming and designing. It's a lot more of a rapid iterative approach across multiple teams, some of them not even in the same firm, just working together as each one has its own responsibility. We used to be handed off interior spaces from architects saying, there's a digital moment going over there. David's point is like, we explore the space, we see what's curiosity involves around it. At that point, we already involve the architect in this strategic process thinking. So the team sport is a super valid thing, and it just means that we have to work almost like in lockstep and rapidly iterate, as opposed to like, we do the SD, DD, CD, but we do it in a lot more rapid iterations inside it, multiple cycles.
If I could just piggyback on that, I would say it's a hybrid, right? So that rapid iterative, let's call it agile kind of workflow that's powered by design thinking is really great to solve certain kinds of problems. It's not how we build buildings. And at the end of the day, we're talking about work that occurs in the physical, in the built environment. And so going back to the parts of, you know, there's a 2,000-year pretty much unchanged architectural process that is unchanged for a good reason. It's great at defining and managing the risk of building spaces. And that waterfall process that governs that is the best way to manage the risk of construction. And yet we know that software and design and innovation happen in this more iterative way. So I think part of this, the part of, you know, the emerging best practices, and I think we talk about it in our practice, I know you guys do, is how do we effectively introduce the client to a way of working that synthesizes, or at least lets them live harmoniously, an iterative, you know, sprint-based approach to design and software questions, while being responsible to the physical and technical design and the way that the critical path flows through that side. So it's not either or, you know, it's not either or.
Yeah, Abe.
I was going to say to the realistic piece of that as well is designers design. That's what we do, right? We have ideas and concepts and we put them on paper. And we hand those papers and those PDFs over to clients, and hopefully, you know, they can ingest what they're looking at and visualize what it is that they're designing. Bloomberg, at its core, is a data company, but also a technology company that provides data. And our creative team has developed a VR experience where they have folks come over to their lab and truly immerse themselves into the space that we're designing. And it's happened multiple times now where we've actually seen something on paper, and it's exactly the way it's drawn out, but then we enter in the VR space, and it's like, oh, wow, those sight lines are really horrible. Yeah. I didn't understand the ceiling is 10 feet tall, or I really didn't understand how close I was to the bathroom, right? Because it's on paper. Everything's right there. We know the X, we know the symbols, we see the legend, but once we enter into that space, it really helps us take it from theory into true practice. And that's the beauty of being part of this age that we're living in, where we're really on the cusp of technology, and even if we are pioneers and novices, it's encouraging to know that we're going to push forward, and this current technology, this current approach is going to be the standard maybe 20 years from now.
All right, very good. All right, we have a few minutes for some questions. If you have any questions, we have a microphone we'll pass around. Does anybody? Yes, sir. I didn't know Randy was here. Yeah, pass that down.
So I have a couple of questions, they're kind of related. I heard you mention generative content, algorithmically generative content. Have you experimented with that? And do you think that that fills the gap, the huge content gap when we present this beautiful video wall to our clients and say, by the way, you've got to put something on it?
It's part of a series of, it's really a part of, so yes, this is the bulk of our practice for the last, I'd say, decade has been coming up with ways of having software-driven visual environments that are sometimes playing back chunks of media, sometimes recombining and reframing and recompositing existing material, and sometimes where the data is there, or it's an abstract or more evocative environment or moment. And you can think of that algorithmic, you know, how can the robot friends help us, right, in this problem? Well, so first of all, even if you just think about it from a playlist standpoint, what poor person is sitting there trying to program 100 display groups across the planet, and has to go and fill each one with 15-second chunks of video, or maybe if they're lucky and the digital signage platform supports it, an HTML page, and now they're trying to manage this at scale. They can't. So how can we say, well, you know what? An algorithm could help you say something like a phrase that says, globally, during local daytime, I want brand messages, you know, global brand messaging on 20% of the time, and then whatever the local avails are for the brand manager locally, to create a sort of a rule for how to populate time, right? So that's one way to think about it. The other is we heard, you know, especially in an organization like Bloomberg, where it's a lot of data-driven storytelling, you've got a lot of different shapes and sizes of canvases. How do you author once and syndicate to any shape or size or of device or touch point? That's a huge way that, you know, what does that mean? That means that you're defining the layouts with rules, with algorithms, the same way that your responsive website can follow the orientation of your tablet. Extrapolate that out to, well, I can deal with a long ribbon at HQ and a triptych of lobby displays in Austin. So there's that idea. So generative algorithmic content is a part of it, right? We also do a lot of stuff where we're using AI and GANs and networks to extend media.
So my related question is, have you experimented or have you deployed facial recognition that works with effective computing so you can tell how people are reacting to the content and have the content then be changed so that you get essentially a better, because that's one quite convincing way. If you're talking about return on investment and not having the project killed, you can say, well, we can tailor the content, you know, we can actually monitor how people are reacting to the content, and we can tailor it, and there's no human interaction involved. Is that something that you've deployed or that you're planning on deploying, and how successful has it been?
I think, and I'm gonna answer your question because you're directing it to me, but I know that this is true of various collaborations across this community, and certainly it's absolutely true on all of ours. We call it instrumenting the space. We're putting sensors in. Could be FLIRs, it could be LiDARs, it could be Connects, it could be Bluetooth low energy triangulation, you know, indoor positioning systems, it could be facial recognition. We might just be leveraging actually a bunch of security cams now because there's some great AI enabled sort of machine vision stuff that replaces the need for certain kinds of sensors. So once those are in place, you're going to use them for a lot of different reasons. You're going to use them to create feedback loops and allow this media to be, we don't necessarily call it interactive, but maybe it's responsive. The space is responding to how it's being used and who's there and how much attention they're paying. But another way to piggyback on what you were saying about ROI and those feedback loops is, what are the metrics? Who is here? How do we affect their behavior? What kind of, to the point that actually we're not just going and looking at face which we've actually used more for gaze detection than face tracking or face matching. And then, ultimately, how do you create personalization if that's part of the objective too, right? So you're inviting people to get more intimate and come in for an interaction, maybe then a transaction, but that's got to be an invitation. This isn't an ad that's yelling at you from the side of the building.
Right. I mean, at some point, it could get it could be obnoxious as well. So clearly, there has to be
At some point, I would say usually.
Right. Well,
if we're not careful.
I've seen some quite. You were talking about AR before, and I've seen some quite dystopian versions of AR where everybody's wearing their heads-up display and constantly has advertising pushed to them that they can't get away from as well. So, I mean, everything has a positive and a negative. But thanks for answering my question.
Thank you very much. We've got a couple more time, probably one or two more questions. Anybody has? Randy? Don't fight over the mic.
This question kind of directed to Sam, but all of you. Sam, you mentioned that you saw this 5 years ago in a lab and it wowed you, and I agree.
Real quickly, the transparent display.
Yes, the transparent, OLED. What wows have you seen that you think have real legs technology-wise that'll come out in the next 5 years? And do I need to invest in a Velcro company for laying digital carpet?
That's an interesting concept. Yeah, definitely pixel pitch on LED floors is getting finer and finer, so yeah, you should think about that. And yeah, there's a lot of applications for that. The thing that I've seen, well, there's a couple of things. So like I talked about it a little earlier about micro LED, and I'm talking like, hundredths of millimeter sized LED pixels that are, 10,000 nits, so very bright. That is super exciting to me just because of all of the things that it can enable. Because if you think about the ways that we've traditionally solved like the 3D display, it's, traditionally it's some kind of lenticular lens or something that goes in front of the display. And when you put a filter in front, you block light, you block color. And so starting with a pixel that's extremely bright and extremely wide color gamut just gives you the ability to add layers of optical layers in front of it in order to create multi-depth displays. And I can't remember who was mentioning earlier, but it's like with the paper, people were looking at paper plans of something and they thought, yeah, it looks great, and then they saw it in VR and were like, no, that's terrible. Well, that's because we see the world in 3D. So the idea that a technology is going to enable like a holographic display so we can see the digital content in the way that we see the real world and experience it that way is just super exciting. So
Thank you.
One last question. No?
I can expand on that. There's one of the other technologies that I've seen is actually very similar based to an LED is actually a Hogel-based technology or a field of light display. And think of the concept where each pixel is actually its own HD display or more. And that it basically ray traces off in different directions, so you can completely see a passive three-dimensional image that looks like a LED or an LCD. I've seen working versions of it, behind closed doors and that kind of stuff, and it's phenomenal. Like when you see it, it just takes your breath away. It's just absolutely amazing.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's holographic displays or light field displays. They blow your mind when you see them. But of course, we can't tell you because we're under NDA.
You realize we are recording this, right?
Dang, you are, right?
Thank you all so much. We'll start from the end here, and Aaron Sharon from TAD. Thank you, sir. How do people get a hold of you or TAD if they want?
Besides business cards and tadassociates.net.
All right.
That's pretty much the easiest way to do it. I'll be around here if anybody wants to chat, and obviously tadassociates.net.
Okay, very good. Sam?
Well, I'll be here for a while because we have our open house event. And then you can find me via our website. Also, my LinkedIn profile. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, all of those.
And
Facebook.
Sam Phoenix, spell Phoenix for folks.
Oh, yeah, it's not with an O, so not Phoenix, Arizona. Phenix, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only one with that name, for sure on Twitter, so.
Okay.
And WeChat. I'm on WeChat.
WeChat, we're good. All right. James?
People can get a hold of me either through the website, which is rpvisuals.com, or just email me at james@rpvisuals.com. It's probably the best way because I travel a lot. So it's better to have that than try and phone. So I'll be on a plane somewhere.
Abe?
One of Bloomberg's things is like no one has titles besides the CEO, so we don't have a lot of business cards either, but email is definitely the easiest and the best. A as in Abraham, P as in Pierre, IERRE, the number 8, because it was 7 before me, at bloomberg.net, not .com, APierre8 at bloomberg.net.
There were 7 other APAs at Bloomberg. Okay. All right, Michael?
Great. Either through our website at gensler.com or email me directly at michael_Schneider@gensler.com.
Again, David?
Also through our website, av-controls.com. I'm David if you want to email me. And if you want to see some fun stuff, we're pretty active on Instagram with shiny stuff, at AVC NYC, and then same on other platforms, just less fun.
All right, very good. And for me, for Tim Albright, don't follow me on the Twitters, but go by the website, please, AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv, you'll find stuff like this. We did a couple different things this week in New York. Last week, we were in London, broadcasting live from there. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be hanging out with the folks at AVEC. So if you're going to the AVIXA event in AVEC, I'll be doing this very thing in New Orleans. So all that and more at AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv. Thank you so much to Leyard and Planar for having us. Enjoy your time here tonight. Thanks. Thank you, sir.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.